Hello. Today I would like to talk about sports drafts from the perspective of an economist. This video is going to follow the paper by Brahms and Straffen from 1979 on sports drafts. You don't need to read that paper, just be aware that these results are from a paper that was published 40 years ago. So here's the idea. Um, with sports drafts, we have teams that need to pick players, and it the problem that we're going to be looking at will have a flavor similar to the voting problems that I looked in the previous two videos, and this is why I'm trying to bundle it with the voting videos. That is my rationale for that. So let's look at the setup of the problem, the model of a sports draft. In the model, there will be several teams, and there will be a pool of players. So if there are n teams, there will be n times k players, so that each team will get exactly k players from the pool of the incoming players. And I assume that you know the basic rules of the draft. The teams are ordered, and so one by one, they go and pick one player from the pool until no players are left. So the first team goes first, then goes the second team, third team, and so on. And once they reach the end of the list of the teams, the first team gets their second pick, and so on and so forth, until all players are taken from the pool. The basic assumptions of the model will be as follows. First of all, each team will have complete and transitive preferences. This is a term that you should be very familiar by now. Complete and transitive preferences over the set of players, and without ties, again, for simplicity. So basically, each team has a complete ranking of all players in the draft pool. Second assumption is that each team's goal would be to only benefit itself and not to hurt other teams. So you wouldn't want to pick a particular player from the draft pool just so that your opponent does not get it. This assumption is probably violated when it comes to actual drafts, because you care not just about which players you get, but you also care about not helping your rivals to get even stronger. So this is really just to make things simple and to get some kind of idea of what happens, what kind of reasoning teams have to go through when they're deciding who to pick. And the final assumption, not entirely unrealistic, is that each team knows the other team's preference orderings. So each team has some idea, at least, of what other teams care and don't care about. So, for example, some teams might be looking for an offensive player, some teams might care more to strengthen their defense. So you can have an idea of what other teams will be going for. And so the goal of each team is to get the most preferred players, probably the top players on their ranking list. And the problem is, should you be choosing sincerely, that is, when your draft pick time comes, should you pick the best player in the pool given your preferences, or should you pick somebody else expecting that you'll be able to get your best player later if nobody else cares about the player you care about? So just like with voting, there could be incentives to vote strategically. In draft processes, there could be incentives to pick strategically in order to actually get your most preferred players. And so in today's video, I'm going to look at the examples of what's going on when teams pick strategically versus sincerely. And so the results of the paper will basically talk about the properties of the outcomes of sincere versus strategic vote. Let's look at the first example. In the first example, there will be only two teams, 1 and 2, and 4 players, A, B, C, and D, to choose from. And we'll go ahead and assume that team 1 picks first. And suppose that team 1's preferences are just alphabetical, A, B, C, and D, whereas team 2 places A the last and prefers B to C to D. And it's not entirely unreasonable to think about situations when different teams would have different preferences. For instance, you can think of a situation where A is a defensive player and B, C, and D play offense, and so teams agree on the ranking of offensive players. They think that B is the best defensive player. But Team 1 really cares about strengthening its defense, so it would care about getting A before getting any of the offensive players. Versus Team 2 doesn't care about defense as much as about offense, so it would take an offensive player first and only then care about defense. So while everybody can agree on the I don't know, physical characteristics and other observable characteristics of players, they might differ in terms of what kind of player they need more. And so that will be reflected in their preferences. So let's first look at sincere behavior. Sincere choices meaning each team, when they're up for picking, gets their highest preference. So if team 1 picks first, clearly their first choice in the first round should be their top pick, player A. If team 1 picks player A, when it's teams 2 time to pick, well, they can still pick their most preferred player B. So that's what they're going to do in round 1, pick B. Now, with A and B are gone, the only two players left are C and D. And so team 1 prefers C to D, and so they're going to pick C in round 2, and team 2 is going to be left with D. So C and D, and so this is going to be the outcome of the sincere process. Every team just picking their top available player. But now if you look at teams 2 preferences, you can see that they don't really care about getting player A. And if team 1 is aware of team 2's preferences, team 1 may use that knowledge to their advantage. And this is when strategic choosing comes into play. So if we were to look at strategic choices, team 1 could say, okay, team 2 really wants to pick 2 offensive player and doesn't care about A, the defensive player. So let's pick A later and get an offensive player first. So team 1 could say, okay, I don't need to pick A now because team 2 doesn't care about A, so I can pick the next best player on my list and see what happens. So suppose that team 1 decides to pick B in the first round. Well, team 2 has C, D, and A left, and so knowing that team 1 will probably be hunting for A in the second round, it is safe to pick either C or D, and it's better to pick C in this situation. And in round 2, no matter if you're playing sincerely or strategically, you should just be picking the top choice on your list because this is your last pick. So in round 2, team A is left to choose between A and D. Clearly it's going to pick A. And team 2 is going to left with D. And you can see that from team 1's perspective, it got the best 2 players on its list by acting strategically, whereas by acting sincerely, it would get the first and the third player. So it actually improved its condition relative to the sincere strategy. What else can we say? What other ways of evaluating the outcomes of choosing sincerely versus strategically? The usual approach in economics is called Pareto efficiency, and with respect to sports, well, the question, can somebody be made better off without making somebody else worse off, which is the Pareto criterion for efficiency, can be reduced to a more simple question. Would the teams want to trade players? Because if you agree to trade a player to another team, that simply means that you're getting what you think is better, and the other team, if they agree to trade with you, are also getting what they think is better. So let's ask the following question. Are there beneficial trades in either the sincere or the strategic outcomes? And so you can clearly say that in the strategic outcome, there aren't trades that are beneficial to both teams because team 1 gets their top 2 choices, and why would they want to trade in that situation? So no, in this outcome is Pareto efficient. No trades between team 1 and team 2 are possible. In the sincere outcome, turns out the outcome is also pretty efficient because team 1 gets A and C, so it can only improve its well-being by trading C for B, but team 2 will never agree to trade C for B because they value B better than they value C. So again, in the sincere outcome, no mutually beneficial trade is possible. And so this brings us to two results from the paper. And in the paper, they are formulated as theorems because, again, it's a mathematical fact. But I'm going to just call them results so that you can focus on the actual meaning for the draft process. And the first result is that sincere picking, no matter how many teams there could be 2, there could be more than 2, sincere picking results in a Pareto efficient outcome. So for all teams, sorry, I keep calling them firms, but they're really teams. If all teams follow their pick their best picks, follow their preferences, then the resulting allocation of players cannot be improved by trade. And the second result is that with just 2 teams, strategic picking is also pretty efficient. That means there are only 2 teams and they act strategically in the optimal outcome. They won't be trading after they just pick the players. So let's see that the result number 2 doesn't actually stand when we increase the number of teams from 2 to 3 or more. And so we're going to look at the second example now. And in the second example, we'll have 3 teams now and 6 players. So again, there's going to be 2 rounds, and in each round, each team is going to pick 1 player. And so you can see that for convenience, the preferences of the first team are just in alphabetical order, but then for 2 and 3, they're quite reshuffled, and it's not exactly clear just by looking at the preferences what is going on. So again, to begin our analysis, let's look at the sincere choices. Sincere picking would suggest that in the first round, each team will pick their best available alternative. So team 1 will go with A, team 2 will pick with E because E is still available after 1 picks A, and team 3 is going to pick C. So there goes our first round. A for 1, E for 2, C for 3. Now what's left for round 2? So A, E, and C are gone. Team 1 can still pick its second best, B. Team 2, F hasn't been picked, can pick F, and Team 3 can't pick F, can't pick E, so Team 3 is going to be left with D. And now that we've seen the sincere choices, you can actually see that it's player D who is uniformly not desired much by any of the teams. So he or she is ranked 4, 5, and 4 by all the 3 teams. So nobody really wants to get that player. And whereas other players are desired by some teams, but not the others. Okay, so here's the outcome of the sincere choices. To see how teams might get strategic about their behavior, let's just notice that in the sincere outcome, team 1 gets their first 2 picks, the 2 players that it values the most, and team 2 also gets 2 players that it values the most, whereas team 3 gets the first and the 4th player on its list, on its ranking. So this situation is perfect for teams 1 and 2. They would be happy with just proceeding sincerely. So it's team 3 that should think about how it should change its behavior in order to improve its situation. And let's look at what team 3 can do. So my starting point would be the sincere outcome, and then I'm gonna put myself in the position of team 3 and think about the following. How can I do better by not picking my top choice? And so the idea here is as follows. We can go ahead and steal F from team 2. Because really, what we don't care to get is, we don't care to get D, but nobody really wants D. So maybe if instead of picking C the first round, I'm going to pick F the first round, I'll be able to get something better than D in the second round, because E and C might be available for me. Why would that work? So if Team 3 picks F instead of C, knowing that Team 1 places C the first and Team 2 places C the last, Team 3 knows that, just like in the first example, they care about C, other teams don't really care about C. So why not leave C off for the end of the draft and get somebody else first? So start with F. So now Team 2 is not able to pick F, so they should be picking D instead, because once it's going to be their turn to pick, Team 1 picks A, Team 2 is going to pick E, Team 3 is going to pick C, Team 1 is going to pick B, so A, B, E, and F are gone. What's left is D and C, and Team 2 cares more about D than about C, so they should be picking D. And Team 3 is going to be left with C instead. And so this situation clearly benefits Team 3 by switching their pick in the first round from their most preferred option to their second best option. They can actually end up with the two of their best picks, because 1 doesn't care much about C, 2 doesn't care about C at all. So getting C would be easy for 3 if they leave C for the second round. But now Team 2 is at a loss, because originally in their sincere outcome they were getting their best picks, E and F. But now instead of F, they're getting D. And so they could say, well, looks like I'm not getting F, but I don't want to get in D instead. Can I try getting B rather than F? Because you can see that, well, F will be taken in the first round before 2 gets to get its second pick. So why not try with B instead? And again, Team 2 can use the similar logic of saying, well, E is my first choice, my top choice, but nobody else cares about E as much as I care about E. So why not try getting B first and then hoping that we can get E in the second round? So here's the idea. That's the allocation after 3 starts being strategic, whereas 1 and 2 are still sincere. And so now Team 2 can say, rather than going E, I can go B in the first round. So Team 1 picks A, Team 2 picks B, their third choice rather than their best choice. Team 3 picks F, and now Team 1 in their second round cannot get B anymore because B is already taken, but C is still available. So they're risking, they're going to take C, and so Team 3 is risking of losing its best pick to Team 1. So if that is the case, then Team 3 shouldn't really be picking F in the first round, but they should actually stick to C, because otherwise they'll lose it. So here's now how things are changing. 1 is picking A, 2 is picking B, 3 is picking C, and so when it comes back to Team 1, their best option is D, because the only players left are D, E, and F. So 1 should be picking D. A, B, C, D. Then the 2 players left are E and F. Team 2 would be happy to take E, and Team 3 would be happy to take F. E, F. So here is a new set of picks, which takes into account that 3 is being strategic and 2 is being strategic, 1 still being sincere. And so this outcome is great for Team 3 because it gets its 2 best choices. Not as great for Team 1, not as great for Team 2. And remember that Team 1 is still being sincere in the story. So now, if it were Teams 1, time to also strategize about things. What would they have done differently? Well, they would eagerly trade player D for either player B or C. So knowing that player D is the least desirable one of all the players, whereas A is desirable by team 1 and not so desirable by 2 and 3, they can also alter their behavior by not picking up the top choice in the first round, but rather picking somebody else, and then hoping to pick up their top choice in the second round. And I'm not going to go through the details of that reasoning for Team A, but if all three teams act strategically rather than sincere, the outcome is going to be as follows. In the first round, Team 1 picks their third choice C, followed by Team 2 picking E, followed by Team 3 picking F. You can see that Team 2 is picking E because they like E and F, and Team 3 likes E and F, and 1 already stole C from Team 3. So C in the first round for 1, E in the first round for 2, F in the first round for 3, and A is still left in the pool, so in the second round, Team 1 gets its best pick A, Team 2 gets B, and Team 3 is left with D. D is really that hot potato that everybody wants to get rid of. So it's not surprising that when all three teams are acting strategically, Team 3 is left with D again, just like it is left with D under sincere choices. Now let's compare the two outcomes. What's going on here? And again, I gave you a little preview of the result. When all three teams are acting strategically and acting optimally, Team 1 is not getting their first two choices, and Team 2 is not getting their first two choices, and Team 3 is not getting their first two choices either. In fact, every team is worse off. 1 gets A and C instead of A and B, 2 gets E and B first and third choice instead of first and second choice, and Team 3 gets F and D second and fourth instead of C and D first and fourth. So clearly, all teams would have preferred the sincere outcome, but with the sincere outcome, Team 3 has an incentive to act strategically, and so that's why the sincere outcome is less realistic than the strategic outcome. So this is sort of counterintuitive, but when each of the three teams act in their own self-interest, they result in the outcome that is worse than if they were just sincere about their choices. Now we can also see that the strategic outcome is also not Pareto efficient, and in fact there exists a trade that will improve the well-being of all teams. Let's look at Team 1. They get A and C, so they would be happy to trade C to B. Get rid of C and get B. Who has B? Team 2 has B. Team 2 would like to get F for B. Who has F? Team 3. And 3 would like to get C for F. So it's a trade between three teams. Let's see how it's going to go. Team 1 will send C to Team 3. Team 2 will send B to Team 1, and Team 3 will send F to Team 2. So they will, if they trade in this manner, it's going to be an improvement for everyone, because each team will get a better player in exchange for a worse player from the perspective of their own preferences. And interestingly enough, that trade will bring the allocation back to the sincere allocation. So this is quite strange, but also quite interesting. So if the firms were strategic, then they would first end up in the outcome in which they're all worse off. But then, because that outcome is not Pareto efficient, they can actually trade with each other and improve their outcome right after they picked players from the draft. And once they've picked players, they can go back to a Pareto efficient outcome. And so this example can be generalized to another theorem in that paper, and I'm going to talk about it as well. And on top of that, there's going to be one final result from that paper that I'm not going to be covering in an example, but you can imagine And if you're interested, you can read in the paper what it is about. So here are the remaining two results. First of all, with more than two teams, optimal strategic play, that is, not following your sincere preferences, but rather acting strategically in the hope of getting the best players on your list. Strategic play may result in an outcome that is not very efficient and that is worse than the sincere outcome for each team. The difference here is that the strategic outcome would be an equilibrium outcome, whereas a sincere outcome would not be an equilibrium outcome because at least one of the teams will want to do something differently under the sincere play. So an equilibrium outcome happens to be worse than a disequilibrium outcome, which is kind of what economics is about. Some equilibria aren't great. So in this case, an equilibrium can have worse properties. And the final result, which is sort of counterintuitive to begin with, but not counterintuitive once you've seen my reasoning in this video, that result says that with more than two teams, in optimal strategic play, a team may do better by occupying a later position in the draft. That is, it is not always advantageous to go ahead and pick first. And so these results are quite interesting, but I want you to remember that they rely on a very serious set of assumptions. One being that teams only care about their well-being and they don't care to hurt the other teams, their rivals. And the second being that teams are perfectly aware of what the opponent's preferences are. And so in a more realistic setting where preferences are not completely known and teams might be willing to hurt each other, these results may not stand. So be aware of that. Thank you.